think I did?
He wanted me to follow up with you to ask if you wanted to talk about the fellow experience.
I think
It's up
that's
to
fine.
you.
I think so. I was thinking.
Like I'm prepared to kind of put it in wherever you need
Right.
me to put
I
it in.
mean, so where's the thing about you've been there both sides? So
The first question.
yeah. So this is something that I can plug in here, or it's also something that we can plug in here. Let's. I can also put it here.
Yeah, I think you should. I mean, I think like here you can just kind of start with your story to say like, you know, I'm from Israel, then I was on the campus, and this is how that ideological etymology happened for me. Now I'm at the ship, you know.
Yeah.
I think that would work really well there. So I actually might not even change the question and just have you organically go into that if
That's fine.
okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then at the very end of the event, so after like we clap, Yonatan, if you could just come up here and kind of say PC, March 1 through 3, I'm going. I'd love for you to come.
Tell me when you see that after
like we're done with the event. So after Q&A. And our staff will say last question. So we'll clap for Yonatan, and then you just walk up here and kind of say thank you, close it however you want to. And then promote, you know, just, I mean, one line. I'll also say, I don't know if you want to share it tonight, but you have 6. We used your club gift this year, you know, for spots. Yeah. You have 6 spots.
Yep.
You have 5 spots.
Yep.
So, you know, I don't know how you're planning to set up the thing, but, you know, you guys have 5 spots. So
that's great.
However, you know, you want to allocate that.
I want to think about, I mean, not everyone here is going to be an Emanu member, so let me think about a way that I want to, if I can find a tactful and diplomatic way to say that, I will. But
We also, like, we have olive letters that we can send from you tomorrow, and you can send a special one to Emanu.
That's nice.
And say that the spots, if you want to, and we'll send a separate one from you, kind of to say generically, thank you for being with us. Great. Because you're right, you wouldn't want someone from competition, like you want to keep it nice. I totally get that. And they put me in this chair. Is that okay?
Yeah. Where do you want me?
Next door.
Oh.
So I'm where the cards are. Okay. Great.
And then after our bit, am I going to sit in the congregation?
And I'll join you. So the two of us will go and sit together, and Evelyn will come up and share her story.
And you're going to do all that sort of emceeing and.
Yep. So we're not going to announce her, but we discussed it. I'm just going to like stare her down.
Give her the nod.
The nod, and she's going to come on up. It's a great story. She's Jewish, and she did. I hope you are okay. I do want to just say, like, this was kind of a non-negotiable one for her. Fine. Okay. I thought it was, but always want to make sure that.
Thank you for checking.
Yeah. Yeah, you're pretty great. And wherever you want to sit, kind of prior to, because I'm going to open it up, and then I'll call you up. So I say go Astros, and then.
Nice. Okay.
But like I'll say tonight, we're excited to hear firsthand from her. Hand, you know, thank you and go Astros.
Terrific.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're gonna do like a hard start at 6:15 and give people, you know, 15 minutes to kind of get in and all of that. Yeah, it should be great. And I'm sure Elias told you, but he's with his kids tonight.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, his family, like right now, he says, Rose, I think my kids might divorce me. I mean, like they're everywhere right now.
Yeah.
It's so great because they're both very powerful people. I thought that his oldest would actually enjoy the programs.
How old is she?
She's, I think, 8, between 8 and 11.
Okay.
So she's quite bright. Like they went on a father-daughter trip.
Not surprise me.
Right. They went on a father-daughter trip to California, and her one request was to go visit Google. Like what, like 8-year-old, you know, like wants to go to Google. So cute. So she's just all in.
So sweet.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go bring some people, and yeah, we'll try to do that hard start by 6:15.
That's fine. I'm gonna make 2 notes, and then we'll. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. You're welcome. sent you a note, Jason, about the video. Did you see it? The volume is very, very, very low. Is there any way you can boost it from your end?
Nah, I was worried about that, but I figured it was what I was listening to. See if the screensaver.
Hmm?
Turn on and see. Hey, David.
Oh, that's interesting.
The Oh, he does have a black screen. Okay. Okay.
Did you test if it turned up the light?
Yeah, no, he's had it.
Can you?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, pretty good.
It's that.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, so we're good.
No, but why is?
I
Ah!
was like, is it not working? Alright. Well, now you should be good. Alright. Still kind of laggy.
Good evening, everyone. I think that is the fastest I've ever quieted a room. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Emanu El AIPAC Partnership event. Now, I know this is not the only important event happening in our city tonight, so thank you for making the time to be here with us. For those that don't know me, my name's Rose Creditor. I'm AIPAC Southwest Regional Synagogue Initiative Director. As Americans in 2019, we find ourselves as divided as most of us can ever remember. Our society is polarized, our politics toxic, and our world is becoming less and less safe. It can be demoralizing, and often we want to detach ourselves altogether. But whenever I feel those pangs of frustration, I remember why our collective voice matters. Because for countless Jewish ancestors before us, their voices didn't. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have hoped, have prayed for this moment, a moment of Jewish sovereignty and refuge from persecution. And there have only been 3 such moments in the history of the Jewish people. The first, the kingdom of David, and the monarchy lasted 414 years before it was wiped out and expelled. The second was the Hashmonean dynasty, the second area of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, and it lasted only 102 years before its expulsion. For 2,000 years and 100 generations of exile thereafter, the notion of an independent and safe Jewish homeland in Israel was at best a flickering dream. But here we are, the generation lucky enough to experience a strong, safe, and independent Jewish state. The generations of Americans who know what it's like for our country to stand with Israel in her quest for security. The generation with the ability to access our nation's leaders and directly advocate for what we believe in. And the generation who gets to bear witness not only a living state, but a flourishing one, with innovations like space technology taking flight and shaping the world, as we'll hear about tonight. This is why our voice matters today. And at AIPAC, we ensure every day the Jewish homeland never goes back to being that flickering dream it once was, but a bright light among the nations. And that ignites a light in me to ensure that Israel has what she needs to defend herself by herself, with America by her side, for the challenges not only for today, but the challenges also for tomorrow. Being engaged in both synagogue life and AIPAC shows the power in organizing, in coming together, Jews and pro-Israel leaders alike as a united community. That is the partnership we want to demonstrate to you tonight. And one of the most tangible elements of that partnership happened this past summer, when 2 of Houston's rabbinical leaders, Rabbi David Lyon from Beth Israel and our own congregation Emanu El's Rabbi Oren Hayon, traveled to Israel with AIPAC's educational foundation, AIEF. AIEF takes thousands of community leaders to Israel, where they pull back the curtain and provide an on-the-ground, behind-the-scenes look at the complexities that Israel faces every day. Since 2014, AIEF has taken a total of 99 rabbis from across denominational divides from all over the country. Though every trip has its own level of uniqueness, each roughly spends 7 packed days on the ground in Israel, where they have the opportunity to engage with experts in geopolitics, security, and Israeli and Palestinian society. Tonight, we are excited to hear firsthand from Rabbi Hayon what his experience meant to him, both on the ground and now that he's home. Thank you for being here, and go Astros. I'm sure will agree that the best way to understand Israel is to experience Israel. And I think it's safe to say, Rabbi, that you've been to Israel several times. What motivated you to go on this trip, and what made this trip different than previous ones?
I've been to Israel a lot of times, both as a rabbi, as a person with a large Israeli family, as a Jew, as a student. There is something unique about traveling, first of all, with colleagues, other rabbis who face similar challenges, are exploring similar questions, and trying to integrate Israel into their daily life and work the same way that I am. And also, this is my first time traveling with AIAF, obviously, so this trip was unique in the sort of itinerary access and high-level conversations that we were able to have on the ground. It was unusual for a trip to Israel that we don't, I'll talk a little bit more about this later if I have the chance, but this was not a tourist trip. We didn't spend any time on the beach. We didn't spend any time at the Western Wall. We had our time really focused in very, very busy days of high-level meetings, consultations, and briefings. So that, just from a format perspective, that's what made it unique. The company obviously made it unique. And I think something else that neither AIF nor I nor any of the participants could have planned for is that what made the trip unique is where it landed in this particular moment in American and Israeli political history. And we can talk a little bit more about that also.
And so before we get into the trip itself, because I do know you have stories you want to share, can you give us a quick sense of the makeup of the participants on the trip, of some of the colleagues that you traveled to Israel with?
Right, so I had 17 colleagues that were on the trip, all of us from progressive denominations within Israel, within Judaism, most of whom were synagogue pulpit rabbis, but not all. We had a colleague who works in a chaplaincy capacity, people from all over the country, from coast to coast, different regions, serving different kinds of populations and in different kind of demographic profiles of their constituencies. So very diverse. I think I only knew the names of one or two of them before I went on the trip, so I got a chance to meet some new colleagues and friends as part of the trip.
And so now for the trip itself, and I will say that from an AIPAC standpoint, this is the hardest trip for us to plan. We send many people to Israel that have never been, and therefore we can do the touristy things, but you've lived in Israel, you've breathed Israel so many times, probably led trips to Israel yourself. Yeah. So share with us a few moments or stories from this trip that really stuck to you.
It's hard to pick one or two. The days were very, very busy. We started very early in the morning and went until very late at night. Every day except Shabbat, which we got a little bit of resting time to breathe, but the days were very packed, and we were all over the country from side to side and, and north to south. We also were very fortunate to have access to people from very high levels of expertise and experience in, as you said, government, the sciences, private business and enterprise, foreign relations, religious leadership, all over the place. There were a couple of moments that I think I will remember most vividly. One was the opportunity we had that I talked about briefly on Kol Nidre, for those folks that were here as part of our worship services during that holiday, which was the opportunity to go into the tunnel that was dug by these Hezbollah operatives from Lebanon to make their way into a space they hope to sort of pop up in northern Israel. And as I mentioned very briefly in my remarks from the Bima during that sermon, the sophistication and technology that went into planning and digging and creating these tunnels was just mind-boggling. I mean, they're so deep and so long, the kind of time and care and breathtaking expense that they went to dig these tunnels without being detected, to wire them with electricity, to make sure that there was ventilation and climate control, a mile, half a mile underground, to wire them with communications equipment and a sort of hand cart to ferry people and equipment back and forth in the tunnel was really quite devastating, quite powerful, and pretty unforgettable to think about the kinds of resources that were dedicated to digging the tunnels. So that definitely brought into sharp relief what it is that Israel is up against when it's trying to protect the northern border. So that was one episode, and the other was one that I think has become more important now that I've been back, and that was the security briefing that we received from a military officer who was telling us about some of the developments in Syria. Now it's months later, so everything that we talked about going on in Syria then is very different than what's going on in Syria today. But it was a really helpful reminder about how even in the best of cases, a stable Syria that is dedicated at destabilizing Israel is a dangerous and frightening threat. And every time I read the news now today, thinking about how much more it is the case that a destabilized, vacuous Syria poses a threat to the region when there is space made for other bad actors to move into the neighborhood and sort of work out their own agendas against the Jewish state.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we're sitting here in Houston, Texas, we really do forget how trivial those borders are, and that what happens around Israel truly affects what happens inside of Israel too. And so going back to why the missile defense that so many of you have helped AIPAC lobby for and getting Israel the funding that she needs is so critical. So next time you go to Israel will not be visiting a new tunnel, or
Right.
That border will be safe and secure. Right. So I know you came back from the trip with a deep understanding of national AIPAC conversation. So how did your personal relationship with AIPAC grow since coming home?
Well, I think, again, one of the factors that's at play is that I was there over the summer. I came back, we're now at the end of October, and American politics have shifted. Israeli politics are very different now than they were in July. And I think the sort of volatility in both places of the way that politics shift and rebalance, the way that leadership shifts and rebalances, is just kind of another, if you're talking about your investments in the stock market, for example, and you know that you're investing in a market where there's a lot of volatility and change, the best to provide for the future is to make sure that your investments are diversified. So to me, this experience has sort of helped make that a reality when it comes to the relationship with Israel also, that as things become more volatile and ever-changing and sort of turning on a dime politically, it underscores for me the importance that the relationship between Israel and the United States is as diversified as possible. That it's a relationship that embraces and includes people from across the partisan spectrum, that regardless of how you vote or where you live or what you do for a living, you recognize that partnership is in our best interest, certainly as a nation, and even more so as in my community, as Jewish Americans.
And something we like to say in AIPAC, and I think it also relates here in any community congregational space, is that to be unified does not mean to be uniform, and that the diversity can exist under one large umbrella in one tent, which is something that I truly value working with AIPAC.
Right, and I think that coming back now to the let's say energetic political conversations that we're in today.
Well said.
I think that it's, I'm more keenly aware of how important it is to me to know that the elected officials that we put into office, it's very important to me that they know that despite the volatility and despite the diversity, we have a strong, unified voice expressing how important it is that we maintain that relationship with Israel. One of the things that I said to one of the colleagues we were with while we were over there is that the one thing that the trip sort of impressed on me, now looking back on it in retrospect, is that if AIPAC didn't exist 5 years ago, it's something we would have to invent today, because the relationship is so important in the face of such change and volatility and upheaval.
Well, thank you for what you do to unify your congregation, to have such a strong sense of Israel advocacy within its halls. And one of the reasons that we created this trip in the first place is because we know that clergy members, rabbinical scholars are a driving force within their congregations for promoting a dialogue about Israel. So with that, my final question is, why is having a strong affinity for Israel and for AIPAC within Congregation Emanu El so important to you?
I will say it's hard for me to sort of separate what I see as institutionally important to what is deeply personally important to me, because having, nurturing, maintaining such a strong emotional connection to Israel is something that has been a part of who I am and who my family is for my whole life. So it's hard for me to imagine being a professional person in the world, whether I was a rabbi or not, that didn't have a strong affection for and connection to Israel. So, my relationship with Israel has always been strong, even though as my politics have developed, as my time here and my work in the United States and the time that I've spent in Israel has changed. I think that what I want those of our members that are here in the sanctuary this morning, what I hope they would hear is that, as you said, this is a relationship that needs their participation regardless of where they find themselves on the political spectrum, regardless of how they vote as Americans, and regardless of what they hope to see in Israel's domestic policy. It's very important to me, now I'll speak institutionally, very important to me that this synagogue be a very broad tent when it comes to who's included and who's at the table and whose voices are heard about Israel, about Zionism, and about the relationship between Israel and our country. I think, again, that kind of diversity that's sort of the broadness of that kind of coalition will only strengthen this community, and I think will only redound to the benefit of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Well, thank you so much. And I remember when I saw your summer travel calendar and that you were making time to go to Israel with AIEF, I was so grateful, also a little bit shocked. I'm sure you're still tired from the amount of traveling that you did. But AIPAC it's only made up of the people in this room and the people that make it so. So thank you for speaking about the U.S.-Israel relationship from the Bima and personal conversations. And I know this is just the beginning of a lot of advocacy coming from Emanu El, which has a long history of Israel advocacy.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. And I hope that if there are folks that are in the room or folks that are beyond the room that are that have open questions in their mind about where their place might be in that relationship, that they'll open a conversation with me about it or with you. I hope that if there are folks that haven't yet thought about it, that they'd consider joining me in Washington, D.C. this spring to come for the policy conference in the beginning of March, which is a very, very important chance for us to hear from our elected officials and for them to hear from us about the importance of that relationship and the way it benefits both countries.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening. So honored to be here with AIPAC members and guests, Rabbi Hayan, and the folks at Congregational Emanu El. In the next few minutes, I would like to share with you why I'm a member of AIPAC and why I am delighted to support this wonderful organization. As a Christian who follows Jesus, the Bible teaches me that Jews are God's chosen people, and that it is of the utmost importance that Israel is protected. In addition to my faith, my connection to Israel is further built upon several important personal relationships in my life. I met my first husband, Rick, in college. On our first date, he shared with me that he wanted to be an astronaut. This was a very lofty aspiration, but before I could fully process what he was explaining to me, he went on to share that he briefly wanted to be a Dallas Cowboy, but he realized that that was unrealistic. We dated throughout college, and Rick and I both graduated in 1980. He received a degree in mechanical engineering and began a career in the U.S. Air Force. Every step he took was pointed towards earning an interview with NASA. In the interim, Rick became a test pilot, went back to school, and received a master's in aeronautical engineering. After interviewing twice with a group of elite candidates, he was selected on his second attempt. We moved to Houston in 1995, and Rick began his training to fulfill his lifelong dream of becoming an astronaut. His first flight in space was in May of 1999 aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. Rick was the pilot on that mission, and they were the first crew to dock and board the brand new International Space Station. Within months of his return, Rick learned that he was being considered for his second mission. Eventually, he was officially assigned a second flight as the commander of STS-107. I remember the day that he came home from work and he told me the wonderful news. But I had to learn from others how big of a deal it was that he would serve as a commander with this only being his second flight, because Rick's excitement was not about the position in the crew. His excitement was the quality of people that he was assigned with. The crew included 3 classmates from his astronaut class of 1995, Michael Anderson, Colton Achala, and Rick. The other 4 astronauts came from the class that followed: Laurel Clark, Willie McCool, Dave Brown, and a payload specialist from Israel named Ilan Ramon. Their designated space shuttle was named Columbia. Ilan and his classmates were the space rookies. All were highly educated, humble, and delightful people. All but one was married, and 5 of the crew, including our family, had children. Ilan and his family brought their Jewish tradition, food, and faith to our diverse group. His wife, Rona Ramon, and I quickly became good friends. She had 4 young children, Asaf, Tal, Yiftach, and Noah, and I had my 2, Laura and Matthew. Laura is with me this evening. I treasure our time together that was usually filled with laughter and joy. I remember telling Rona that the United States will remain strong only as long as our country supports Israel. I still absolutely believe this, and that is why last year, after being introduced to AIPAC, I became a club member, because I believe it's our responsibility to never take for granted that the U.S. continues to support Israel. After a crew flies in space, their post-flight schedule is very busy for several months. In addition to an incredible amount of debriefs and reports, there is an extensive travel itinerary providing presentations to organizations and countries that were the most involved with the mission. All of the shuttle families were officially invited to accompany the crew to Israel after the mission. We could hardly contain our excitement. The crew trained and worked together for 2 years, and finally, after multiple delays, launched January 16th, 2003. Their 16-day mission included over 80 experiments on a 24-hour rotation. The crew was split into 2 shifts, the blue and the red shift. Rick and Ilan were on the blue shift, along with Laurel and Koltna. One of the experiments was designated by the Israeli Space Agency called MEDEX, which stands for Mediterranean Israel Dust Experiment. This experiment looked at mineral dust transported around the planet and evaluated evidence of dust storms and lightning in the Middle East and in Africa. After the tragic loss of Columbia, the hardware of MEDEX was recovered, although badly damaged. Fortunately, the majority of the data produced from the experiment had already been transmitted to scientists at NASA. A few days prior to Columbia's landing day, Rick paid tribute to the crew of Challenger on the anniversary of that tragic loss. We had spoken early that morning in a video conference, and we shared a relatively intimate conversation remembering that awful day, but it was also the anniversary of our very first date in college. We had no idea that it would be the last time we would ever speak. On February 1st, 2003, our families, having returned to Florida the day before, gathered on the runway. As we watched the final countdown, waiting for the return of the shuttle, the clock rolled all the way to 0 with no landing. Rona Ramon stood near me with her 4 children and me with my 2. We had become very dear friends. We would lean on each other in that moment and in the years to come. Rona and I shared a special bond and a family love for each other. A year after the Columbia tragedy, all of our families made that trip to Israel. We were the honored guests of the President of Israel and took part in a moving event at the Knesset with then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. It was bittersweet to finally walk in the land that I had studied and read about all of my life and had shared many conversations with Rick in anticipation of our visit to Israel. It was a profound experience, to say the least. I fell in love with the country and the people. No one has escaped hardship and tragedy, and we were loved and received with open arms. It is one thing to verbally support Israel, but I believe strongly that she needs more than our support of words. Again, such is the basis of my support for AIPAC. Since then, our Israel story has only blossomed further. My daughter Laura spent a summer in Jerusalem serving the Israeli people with work projects in many different regions. Years later, I traveled with a group from my church back to the land. We served the Israeli people with our hard work and sweat, painting schools, packaging care boxes, and serving at soup kitchens. My group traveled one day to Moshav Nahalal Cemetery, and we prayed an ancient Hebrew prayer at Elon's grave and at his son's, who was tragically killed in an F-16 crash only months after receiving his pilot wings in September 2009. A couple of years ago, Rona contacted me and shared the awful news that she had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We communicated mostly via WhatsApp, and last year I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and we shared love and concern for each other. In one text that is still on my phone, Rona remembered a verse that Rick shared with the crew the night before their flight. She told me that it had become her mantra. Joshua 1:9 states, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." When Rona succumbed to cancer last December, I was heartbroken. My dear friend lay in repose at the Perez Peace Center in Jaffa and was duly honored, standing bravely in the face of her personal tragedies and even cancer. President Rivlin said the country would never forget how she built from out of the ruins, enduring meaning and infinite pain. Our bond has continued with her family. In January of this year, representatives of all of the Columbia family, crew members, including me and my daughter Laura, gathered in Israel for the 16th anniversary of the tragedy to participate, which is given each year by the Ramon Foundation, featuring students from all across Israel competing for their experiment to be conducted on the International Space Station. Our families had the privilege of privately meeting with President and Mrs. Rivlin at their residence. On February 1st, we gathered at the Moshav Nahalal Cemetery and we recited Mourner's Kaddish for the Ramon family and for all of our families. I was asked to share some thoughts and recounted Rona's love of Joshua 1:9. She and I also talked about what the book of Isaiah teaches, that to all who mourn in Israel, he will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, festive praise instead of despair. Rona loved the imagery of beauty from ashes, and her grave marker reflects this. That evening, we were treated to a lovely Shabbat dinner with family and friends, and we even traveled to Eilat in the most southern region of Israel and toured the new airport bearing the Ramon name. Inside are murals dedicated to Elon and Asaf and the Columbia crew. Before she passed, Rona told me about the Ramon Foundation that was taking shape in honor of Elon and Asaf. The foundation's focus is academic excellence, social leadership, and groundbreaking courage. Its mission is to inspire a new generation of young Israelis with a sense of purpose and professionalism in the fields of science, aviation, and space. When I was in Israel in January, I learned a very important upcoming launch of an unmanned spacecraft to the moon. The prototype was displayed all during Space Week at the Elon Ramon Conference at the David Intercontinental Hotel in Tel Aviv. I have to tell you, it was quite the buzz, and everyone was really excited about it. Our special guest this evening is one of the men behind that spacecraft and all of that buzz. Yonatan Winetraub is the co-founder of SpaceIL, and I am so proud to say that Yonatan is also a recipient of the Ramon Foundation Scholarship, and I learned this evening that Rona presented that to him. Of course, we have all come to hear about Yonatan and the team at SpaceIL. With the same goals as the Ramon Foundation and all of the Columbia families, SpaceIL has reached thousands and thousands of children across Israel and the United States, inspiring each of us and generations to come. Yonatan is currently a PhD candidate at Stanford studying biophysics. His extensive educational resume includes electrical engineering and computational neuroscience. And as I mentioned, he was also a recipient of the Alain Ramon Scholarship to the International Space University program at NASA Ames. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a very distinct one to introduce to you our special guest this evening, Yonatan Winetraub.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that story, and thank you guys for coming here. Before I start talking about SpaceIL, I do want to mention that the idea of doing a space mission to me came when I was at NASA Ames in 2009 as part of the International Space University. The reason that I was in the International Space University was that I got that scholarship for Rona. So actually, Rona was helping me out from the very birth of this program all the way to the moon, and I'll point it out in a couple of slides as well. So I wanted to talk about this moonshot, the SpaceIL moonshot. Did anyone heard about SpaceIL before? Or yeah, okay, so we have some knowledge of the topic. So the story of SpaceIL, like every good story, started in a bar. As Yariv and myself, you can see here in the picture, we were sitting in a bar in Cologne, it's a suburb of Tel Aviv, and as the alcohol level in our blood rose, we became more and more determined to actually do this and attempt landing the first private robotic mission on the moon. And I still remember the first thought that I had in my mind when we decided we're going to go for it. And it was obviously, woohoo! We're going for the moon. And you know, as we came down and we realized that building a rocket ship is not something you can do in your backyard. You need special facilities to do that. And we need special equipment and special knowledge to do that. So we had to bring some other experts to join us in building this mission. We had also some unexpected help coming our way. And one of them was actually due to your help. AIPAC facilitated the Strategic Partnership Act of 2014, encouraging NASA to go and pursue collaborations with Israel. And we were actually one of those collaborations. You can see that this is the head of the Israeli Space Agency in the center and head of NASA signing this agreement that allowed SpaceIL, or us, to use the resources that NASA had at the time to get us to the moon. And one of the main resources that they provided was the Deep Space Network, which is a network of satellite dishes that can get signals from the very far ends of the solar system. And they helped us by getting the images from the spacecraft to Earth. Now, usually a space mission gets about one antenna at a time. The time of the landing, not one, but two antennas of NASA was directed towards the moon to get the signals from the spacecraft. And I was told that this has never happened before. And all that is because of your help of helping AIPAC get this bill going in. So I want to give a round of applause for you guys. So thank you so much for that. How many people does it take to build a rocket ship that gets to the moon? So at the time that NASA did this in the 60s and 70s, there were tens of thousands of engineers working on that mission. Do you want to estimate how many Israelis have worked on the Israeli mission to do this? Who says, let's say, over 1,000 people? Who says between 500 and 1,000? And who goes less than 500? Less than 3? No, okay. So the truth is, these are all the people. You can see them here. They all fit in one room. And I think it's quite remarkable the way that technology have evolved, and especially in technology in Israel, to make this mission possible. But I cannot take the credit for the entire technology that we developed, because I think one key aspect of technology that was available in Israel that made this mission possible was actually originated from a military necessity. Some of you might know that Israel, unlike any other country in the world, launch their satellites towards the west, which is the wrong direction. The reason you want to launch towards the east is because you can get an extra push from Earth rotation that helps you get into orbit, into space. But Israel has neighbors on the east that might not appreciate rockets being fired in that direction. So for that reason, Israel launches towards the west, which means we cannot use the extra push. We also need to contradict it. And because of that, we cannot build big rockets and send big spacecrafts to space. So Israel space technology is focused on miniaturization, making everything small and compact. And for that reason, we had the technology going. So for that reason, SpaceIL was uniquely positioned in Israel to make the smallest ever spacecraft built and launched to the moon. I do want to point out three people, Ofer Doron, Morris Cannon, and Idon Tebi, who helped pushing this mission forward all the way to the conclusion. And the result is in front of you. This is the smallest spacecraft, World Guinness, smallest spacecraft ever designed and built for the moon. It's about the size of a coffee table, weighs as much as a Mini Cooper, and it's really, really compact, and it was quite a ride. As I mentioned, Israel cannot build big rockets because of all this rotation direction of the wrong direction of sending rocket ships to space. By the way, there is also another claim that the reason that Israel launches its satellites in the wrong direction is because in Hebrew you write from right to left, not left to right, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So anyways, we couldn't launch it from Israel, so we had to get it onto another rocket, and we chose SpaceX out of Florida. So we had to bring the spaceship from Israel to Florida. Well, how do you do that? Well, you package it up and you put it on a plane. But because we are not a government entity, we're a nonprofit, we couldn't afford getting a full plane just to send our spacecraft. So after they loaded up the spaceship, we loaded up some oranges, flew, we made a stop in Europe to drop the oranges, but this is how you get the spaceship to the moon. You first need to, you can't afford first class ticket. This is a picture that was taken in the morning of the launch on February 21st of this year. And as you can see, this is a SpaceX rocket. And you can see the top there is bright white, and the bottom is kind of dirty. Let me zoom in. You see it here? It's kind of dirty. Does anyone want to guess why? Why is it dirty? Let me motivate the younger ones. Those who guess correctly will get this ball. Yeah?
It's because SpaceX lands their rockets, and well, the first stage of the rockets, and then reuses it. So that's already been used, which is why there's soot and stuff on it.
There you go. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. These rockets are being reused, so they go up and down multiple times. They get a little dirty on their way down. This is the third time this rocket flew, so it had two revolutions in and out, and that's what makes this dirty. And I remember walking down with SpaceX representative in the morning of the launch. It says, "Guys, we paid $20 million. Can't you just repaint it?" And they said no. They like the raw feeling of how the rocket looks like. Let me show you the top of the rocket here. This is the canopy, and let me open it up for you. And I want to show you another piece of ingenuity that we had to use to get to space. A ticket to space, even if you're using a used rocket, you would imagine to be cheap. But no, it's very, very expensive. And we couldn't afford buying a full rocket to get it to space and to the moon. So what we did is, did anyone here travel in Uber before? Yeah? Okay. So what you guys see is the Uber of spaceflight. At the top there, this is our sheet, our moon lander, and under it is a communication satellite. This is, by the way, an Indonesian satellite, so I don't think Israel has any official relationship with Indonesia, but we kind of joined a ride to space, and we got there together. So we both collaborated together to get into space. Does anyone want to guess how far space is? Let me ask you this. Do you think maybe New York is closer here, or space is closer to where you're standing right now? Who says New York? Who says space is closer? Well, you guys are correct. Space is actually 60 miles up or so. So that's way closer to New York, but it's in the wrong direction. You just need to go up. It's just a lot more difficult. This is the launch itself. It was beautiful. The entire sky goes bright yellow, and you can see everything illuminated like it's daytime. And as the rocket was just going over the horizon, the moon came up. So you got a really surreal image of what the journey is going to be like. In Israel, everybody got excited, except for this guy. I don't know why he is in shock, but mostly people got really excited. You know how some kids are born troublemakers? So this spacecraft certainly was, and we had problems with the spaceship from the very birth. One of the main problems that we had was with a sensor that's called a star tracker. You can see it over here. It's a star tracker. It's a type of camera that takes picture of the night sky and compares the pictures, the stars that it sees, to a database. And by doing so, it knows where it's pointing, and more importantly, where this rocket engine is pointing as a result. And as the spaceship tilts around, you can see the stars change, and this is how we know where we pointed. The problem was that what happens when you point a camera towards the sun? Like this camera, for example. What happens? It gets blinded, right? It gets blinded. You can't see the stars. And here you can see the problem. The spacecraft, for some reason, got blinded in angles that we did not expect. Now, one might say, guys, you've been working on this for so long. Can't you just test it before you launch? Because after you launch, you can get someone to fix it. Test it beforehand. Well, how would you test something like this? You can put the spaceship outside at night and take pictures of the stars, but the sun is not there. You can do it in daytime, but you can't see the stars. The only time you can see the stars and the sun together is out there in space. And this is why it's called rocket science. It's very difficult to get those two conditions to work here on Earth. And for that reason, we couldn't try it ahead of time. But we had a really cool team in Israel that was very special in the way that they solved problems. So we learned to live with that problem. We never overcome it, but we learned to live with it. Another thing that we wanted to test, and we did test, was what would happen at the moment of impact. We wanted to see if we can come down slowly enough, and how will we absorb the energy of the spacecraft. And for that, I want to volunteer. Does anyone here want to? I need a good jumper, though. Never mind. Yeah, come. All right, all right. What's your name? Trudy. Can I give you a round of applause for Trudy? All right. So I want to show you how the landing legs of the spacecraft work. And for that, Trudy, can you help me out here? So the plan was to bring down the spacecraft on rocket engines up to about 30 feet. And from that point, it would free fall to the surface of the moon and stop using their own legs. So we're going to lift you up 30 feet up in the air and then throw you, see how you, okay. So obviously, the gravity on the moon is different than here on Earth. So 30 feet on the moon is not as severe of an impact as what's happening here on Earth. It's actually equivalent to a jump. So I want to show you here what happens. I want you to pay attention to Trudy. I'm going to ask you to jump as high as you can. And I want you guys to see what happens to your legs and knees when you come down. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 3, jump. What happens? Do it again. 1, 2, 3, jump. What happens to the knees? Why? Why do they bend? To absorb the shock, right? Now let me show you this video. You can see this is stay right here. So you can see this video. These are the landing legs, and these are the knees of the spacecraft. You can see? Rip. Same thing happens there. Let me play it again for you guys. So you can see that these are the knees of the spacecraft, and as the spaceship comes down, they bend, and the design of that is exactly the same as the knees in our body work. All right, thank you so much. I'll give you a moon rock, okay? Yeah, you deserve a round of applause. Yeah, thank you. One important part of the mission was, again, to use this to reach kids and to tell them the story about Israel, the story about technology. And the most straightforward way to do that is by taking a selfie. So we took a selfie, which I think proves without any doubt that the Earth is not flat. We can see that. The picture was taken, by the way, from the spaceship looking down, so you can see the foot of the spacecraft just over the Earth over there. Another thing that we did is we took selfies, or we asked communities around the world to take selfies and send it to us. This is the Chattanooga, Tennessee, which I must admit I did not know existed before they sent out this picture. But we took all those pictures and we put it in a special time capsule, it's about this big. And that time capsule went with us all the way to the moon. And it's still there. So there's claims, the manufacturer did experiments, claims that the time capsule is intact. You can see that the time capsule is composed of those circles. Each one of them contains a real picture or a piece of text that we took with us to the surface of the moon. It's not digital. It's not like you put a USB stick in your computer or something. This is written in a technology that you need a microscope to see, but it's there. And one of the cool artifacts that is actually there, resting on the surface of the moon right now, is the Bible. Do you want to see it? I have a replica of that. So what you see over here, guys, is the entire Bible, written, and every letter is the size of 1 micron, which is the size of a bacteria, and that thing, the replica of that thing, is rested on the surface of the moon right now. And if one of your kids can get it back from me, I'll much appreciate it. If you come after the talk, on the back of it, there is a QR code that you can scan with your phone and actually zoom in and see it and read it and find your portion. So that's pretty cool, coming after that. So we went around the Earth, and we had to fix those problems, as I mentioned, and we had to overcome those difficulties. And then the time came to go to the moon. Now, as I mentioned, we had to share a ride with another satellite. And that puts constraints on us. The easiest way to get to the moon is a direct flight, like the Apollo did. It takes 3 to 4 days, and you're on the moon. However, we couldn't afford to get a direct flight. We took the Uber route, which meant that we had to do multiple revolutions around the Earth for almost 2 months before we can actually capture with the moon. And the time came, and we wanted to do a last revolution, and we wanted to take a picture of the Earth. So we told everyone in Israel to go outside, wave to the spaceship around 4 p.m., and we took a picture of everybody waving in Israel for the spacecraft. That was pretty cool. Unfortunately, it was cloudy, so you can't see anything, but you got to take my word for it. On April 11th, 2019, we began our descent towards the surface of the moon. This is a really interesting. Oh, that's a cool sound effect there. That's an interesting process because at this point, where the spacecraft is descending towards the surface of the moon, we're traveling faster than a bullet. We have to stop that enormous velocity to 0. Otherwise, we're for sure to crash. We have 15 minutes to do so. That's a hell of a break. Unfortunately, the moon does not have atmosphere. So we cannot use parachutes to slow us down. Airbags don't work in that speed. It's way too fast. The only way we can do it is to come down on rockets and fire them as hard as we can to slow down this enormous speed to 0. We have 15 minutes to do so. So you can understand why the tension was very high at the control center behind me. Everybody was really tight and looking on their screens to make sure that everything is working. However, this is to some extent a mirage. Because the moon is so far away, it takes radio signals traveling at the speed of light, more than a few seconds back and forth. So we don't have a joystick here on Earth saying, oh, we see something wrong, go left or go right. By the time we do that, the spaceship is already gone. The spaceship needs to be, for the most part, autonomous and do it on its own. And as I mentioned, there's nothing like landing on the moon here on Earth. It's very, very different. The environment is very different. So we cannot test it start to finish here on Earth. The first time this orchestra played was on the moon. And obviously, we cannot service it. That's also very difficult to do. The first couple of minutes of the landing was spectacular and by the book. You can see this is the data that came down from the spacecraft. Orange means the engine is firing, everything is going well. We obviously took another selfie because we have to, this time with the surface of the moon. And then 11 or 12 minutes in, we got the following message. IMU number 2 not okay. What is IMU number 2? IMU is a sensor very similar to the one that you have on your phone. When you turn the phone around, you know the screen turns with you. This is because the sensor can sense gravity. And we use that sensor to determine how far we are from the surface of the moon. And it's so important that we have two of them, IMU number 1 and IMU number 2. IMU number 2 reported it's not OK. At this point, we had two options. Option number 1, keep it as it is. We have IMU number 1. We have IMU number 2 that is not working, so we can continue as it is. The second option was to restart IMU number 2. Let's restart it, and then we have both of them. So if number 1 is going to be lost for some reason, we're still going to be OK. We had 45 seconds to make that call. What would you do? Who says keep it as it is? Why? We can restart it. There's a button. Yeah. Restarting it may cause more damage. Who says restart, by the way? Why?
There's nothing to lose, and you might gain your redundancy back.
You have nothing to lose and might gain redundancy back. Who objects to anything? I don't know. Yeah? Another opinion? Yeah, well, I wish you were on our team because we selected to restart it. And as a result, we lost communication and went silent. I want to show you how it looks from NASA's perspective. This is they took a picture before, and this is after, before, after. Every startup wants to make an impact. Well, we did one. And just after that, I had a proposal to get another bear sheet and land it like this, and one like this, and then eventually we can do make an art of it. It didn't pass, unfortunately. Too expensive. All right, I want to spend a couple of last minutes about the impact here on Earth. As I mentioned, one of the main missions of the spacecraft was to inspire kids. Kids today, much more interested, maybe not you guys, but you can tell me more. Kids are sometimes much more interested in celebrities and being rock stars than sciences. Am I right? No? Really? You know, I watch the Kardashians, so it's OK. Our hope was to kind of bring back a little bit of the attention that science and engineering, just like the Apollo days did, back to sciences. And we were very happy to work with kids. We went, these are the volunteers, by the way, that actually went school to school, class to class, and talked to kids and tell them how they build the spaceship. Exactly, and the kids can talk to them and see what they did, what they learned when they grew up, and so on and so forth. And these volunteers actually got to 1 million kids. So that, I'm sure that these kids, some of them might pursue careers in science and engineering. I was told, by the way, recently that in the Technion, there is an aero-astro department. They usually accept, I think, 70 people a year. And this year, their acceptance went up 30%. So they actually, we can start seeing the impact of people getting excited about space and engineering. By the way, we don't say that the spaceship crashed. It did land, just in too many pieces. So just bearing that in mind, OK, in your questions. All right, one question is what's next? So, OK, we've done all this. What's going to happen next? And we are thinking about doing another mission when we were trying to see what aspects of the other mission we want to do. But I want to do a little bit of a zoom out and talk about the big picture. Look, up to April of this year, only big governments got to the moon. Starting April of this year, individual companies or organizations can do the same. SpaceIL became the first private interplanetary mission to capture with the moon. This was considered impossible. We did this for $100 million, which sounds like a lot of money, because it is, but it's less than 10% than what NASA quotes for this kind of mission. So the fact that we can bring the cost down significantly is so important, because now, you know, $100 million is a lot of money, but universities can spend that amount of money to do experiments in space. And cost is going to go down. And one day, all of us can go. And that's the true purpose of those kind of missions that we are doing. By the way, this picture that you see up here, it's a very special picture. It cannot be taken from Earth. This is what Pink Floyd, the dark side of the moon. This is the side that is on the other side of the moon. As you can see, it's not dark. It's just the far side. And I tried to call Roger Waters to tell them that, but he wouldn't pick up my phone. I don't know why. And yeah, so that's, if you see him, correct him. This is just the far side, not the dark side. But you can see this type of evolution that technology exists today, mainly in Israel, but also in the United States, all over the place. And I'll give you another example. What you see here, these are high school students that they build a satellite this big. High school students. We're not talking about big companies, big launchers. These are high school students that build a satellite called CubeSat, about this big. And they launched it actually out of the United States like 5 years ago. This is happening today. You can see that the rate that technology evolves and adapts is enormous. I'll give you another example from my PhD. The only way to detect cancer, for example, right now, skin cancer, is by taking a biopsy and looking under a microscope. But development in laser technology and in computer machine learning allows us to use a handheld device to take a picture of the same area and generate what an image would look like if you cut it, but without the cutting. Now, this is an imaginary technology, but because it moves so fast, it's now possible to do so. So the take-home message that I want to give to the kids here, technology is moving so fast, we are basically only limited by our dreams. If you can dream it, and you can try and attempt doing that, you might as well succeed, because technology catches up. And with that, I'll take questions. Thank you. You have mics, I think.
We're going to come around with microphones and ask you to just do a question to the best of your ability. Madeline, right here.
Is this one on?
I'm dying to know why that IMU was not isolated and why it would cause total communications loss. Maybe this is not the moment. I'm happy to come up later and ask if that's more appropriate.
I'll give you the 30 seconds version. So the idea is both IMUs, so as I mentioned, one of the main problems of the spacecraft is we had some problems along the way. It wasn't a smooth ride as it might look like from the outside. And because of that, we had to patch it. We had to do some patches, some corrections to the software. One of those corrections kind of intertwined IMU number 1 and IMU number 2. So reset of IMU number 2 caused the reset of IMU number 1, which caused the spacecraft to think that something is wrong because no IMU is talking to it, which caused the spacecraft to reset, and that caused that was the root cause of what I mentioned. But I don't want to focus on that particular moment because, as I mentioned, the spacecraft was designed to get to the moon, but we didn't have enough money to afford doing multiple redundancies and multiple tests for different aspects. So the fact that we got that far was pretty awesome. And in the next attempt, I'm assuming that would not happen. Maybe something else would happen. But let's leave it in that, yeah.
First of all, congratulations. You made us very proud, and keep going. I have two questions.
Thank you.
You show the space, it shows wet. Why was it wet? Why do you have to be wet?
Oh, the weight, when I saw the weight, why you have wet and dry. So do you know how much your car weighs?
Sort of.
When it's fully fueled or when it's empty? So and in the case of our car, the fuel is not a big part of the mass of the car that we have. So the answer is pretty much the same. But in space, because the moon is so far away, we need to take a lot of fuel.
It was
and then the wet is fully fueled and dry as when the fuel runs out.
And the other question, when you show the picture of your team, some people were not facing the camera. Were they afraid?
Yeah, so there are people that are shy. So one of the main partners with us, the company in Israel that actually makes most of the satellites, is called Israeli Aerospace Industries. And they partnered with us to make this mission possible. They are, however, a defense contractor. So their employees cannot be taking pictures of. So this is why they turned around as it was happening. And you can see a really cool collaboration between a nonprofit that is all about visibility and inspiration and a defense contractor that is all about secrecy and making things work. And I think this collaboration is a big part of why this mission was so successful, because they were not able to make a mission that would be so public in Israel and do such an enormous impact, and we could not build it without them. And I think that this thing was so talked about in Israel, and I think the coolest example is the Star Trekker. A Star Trekker, if you walk around Israel, you can hear conversations in Israel. One of the national sport in Israel is argue about everything. And I could hear Israelis argue about what we should do with the Star Trekker. Should we turn it this way? Why is it blinded? Why is it not blinded? And one of the cool aspects is I think 99.9% of Israelis did not know a Star Trekker exists. And all of a sudden they argue about how to fix its problems. So I think this is an enormous part of this collaboration that allowed it to be a successful mission.
Hi, good evening. Again, Mazel Tov on such a wonderful accomplishment. My question is actually about the Star Tracker. Was it like a resource limitation or a money constraint why the SpaceIL didn't take the Star Trackers and put them through a star field and sun ephemeris simulation, computer simulation here on the ground to see if there was going to be interference in the pointing?
The answer is we did. We did do all that, and still there was this problem. There are two theories about why the Star Trekkers, despite the fact that we went through this rigorous process, still had this sun blinding problem. One theory is that SpaceX, after they released us, they went to release the bottom satellite, the Indonesian one, and when they turned their rocket, they were not supposed to, but we have a video of that. They turned the rockets, they fired, and some of the engines sprayed our cameras. So that could be part of the blinding phenomena. Another part is it could be like some reflections from the legs that were not simulated. And again, we all know that in retrospective, in the beginning, it's a little more difficult to see that. Are there any kids that want to ask questions? I think that would be pretty interesting to ask too.
Right, but before we do that, I just want to remind everybody we'll do one or two questions over here, and then we're going to have our reception next door in Feld Hall, and Yonatan will be around to answer all your techie questions. Right here.
Hello. So as a young person, I am really concerned about the climate changing, and rockets are not very, very good for the climate, and with all the fuel that they burn. And you were talking about how, now all this space travel is a lot more accessible and universities will be able to fund their own experiments in space. Is this not something that's of concern?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, let me explain that way. So I think one of the main problems with those kind of exploratory tasks that are happening is that you don't really know what are the outcomes of sending spaceships out there. It's true that it seems like, well, rocket engines burn fuel. Fuel is bad for the environment. However, or burning fuel might be bad for the environment. However, it's a little more complicated than that. I'll give you an example. So one of the discoveries that were happening because of satellites that were launched into space, one type of satellites are weather satellites. And these satellites are able to track hurricanes. They were able to track the hole that was in the ozone layer. And all those things we did not know existed before satellites actually went up there and took a picture, because from Earth, we cannot see the big picture of how things are looking. So was a satellite that saved lives because it was taking pictures of the ozone layer, making it clear that there is a problem that we could address, was that satellite net positive or net negative in the environmental influence on that? The answer is it's a little complicated because it's true that you can do things that seems on the surface as right now they're adding more pollution, but in the long run, the things that we would learn from it and the discoveries that we will make from it might actually benefit humanity, orders of magnitude more than the momentarily damage that they might cause. And I think a lot of space research is like that.
I think there was one more right here, and then we're going to wrap up.
How was this funded? Were y'all like already a company, or were y'all just like before, like when y'all were in the bar discussing this?
Yeah, so we didn't have that money back then. So the funding came from donors, basically. So these are individuals that were feeling that they believed in the mission and they wanted to support it. And we had donors from all levels, from big donors all the way to high school students that wanted to give Hanukkah allowance for the mission. And I think that part was very important to us because it means that these kids are following the mission and they're involved in it, and our engineers knew that. Because if you mess up and you burn $1 million from a big donor, that's one thing. If you spend all the Hanukkah allowance of one kid, that's a completely different story. So the engineers knew that, and this is an important part of that mission.
Yonatan, we want to say thank you. We want to invite Rabbi Hayon up to close our program. We want to say thank you to Yonatan.
I want to offer my thanks again to Yonatan and to AIPAC for having made this evening possible. It is really a delight that we're able to open our home to all of you, especially those of you to whom, for whom this is not your normal spiritual home. We're glad that you're here to have a chance to connect with this community and with all of us who have a deep personal vested interest in the relationship between our country and Israel. Two important things I want to pass along to you before we close and head to the reception. Number one, Nationals 2, Astros 0. Sorry. Number two, a special announcement for anyone that has not yet decided about attending the AIPAC Policy Conference in March. I would love for you to come and join us. If you are an Emanu El member, I'd love to talk to you, especially about how we can make your trip a possibility. It is a uniquely powerful, fascinating, very enlightening opportunity every time you go to connect with your elected officials and learn a lot more about what the benefits are of this relationship between our two nations. So those two pieces of information in your mind and in your pocket. I want to thank you again for being here this evening. Thank you for joining us. Please join us for a few moments in Feld Hall.